The morning sun cast long shadows across the corridors of Buckingham Palace as Captain James Morrison adjusted his red uniform for what he thought would be another routine day. He had served the royal family for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared him for the phone call that would change everything. "Captain Morrison, we need you in the Queen Consort's private quarters immediately," came the urgent voice of the palace secretary. The tone was different from usual. There was something heavy in those words that made James quicken his pace down the marble hallways. When he arrived at Camilla's chambers, he found a scene of controlled chaos. Palace officials whispered in hushed tones while security personnel stood at attention. The Queen Consort herself was notably absent, having left earlier that morning for what was supposed to be a charity engagement in Kent. "What's the situation?" James asked the chief of staff, who looked unusually pale despite his years of handling royal crises. "We received an anonymous tip this morning," the chief explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone claimed that stolen royal artifacts are hidden in the Queen Consort's private closet. The caller provided specific details that we cannot ignore." James felt his stomach drop. In all his years of service, accusations against a member of the royal family were unthinkable. Yet here they were, standing outside Camilla's most private space, preparing to conduct a search that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The anonymous caller had been surprisingly detailed. They claimed to know about a secret compartment behind the Queen Consort's evening gowns, describing the exact location and even mentioning a particular blue dress that served as a marker. The caller insisted that items belonging to the late Queen Elizabeth were hidden there, items that should have been with the crown jewels or in the royal collection. "Sir, with respect, this feels wrong," James said to the chief of staff. "The Queen Consort has served faithfully. Why would she take anything?" The chief of staff nodded grimly. "I share your concerns, Captain, but we cannot ignore such specific allegations. If we don't investigate and word gets out, it could be far worse for everyone involved. We must handle this discreetly and professionally." The team assembled for the search was small and carefully chosen. Besides James, there was Detective Inspector Sarah Chen from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Royal Protection Unit, Dr. Margaret Whitfield from the Royal Collection Trust, and 2 trusted palace security officers. Each person had signed additional confidentiality agreements that morning. As they approached the ornate doors to Camilla's private dressing room, James couldn't help but think about the woman he had protected for years. He remembered her nervous laughter during her first official engagements, her genuine warmth with palace staff, and her dedication to various charities. The idea of her stealing anything seemed absurd. The dressing room was exactly what one would expect of royalty: elegant, spacious, and meticulously organized. Rows of designer dresses hung in perfect order, while shoes were arranged by color and season. Everything had its place, reflecting Camilla's well-known attention to detail. The caller mentioned a blue evening gown as a reference point, Detective Inspector Chen said, consulting her notes. "Something about looking behind the third blue dress from the left?" Dr. Whitfield, an expert in royal artifacts who had spent decades cataloging the royal collection, examined the area carefully. Her trained eye scanned every detail, looking for anything that seemed out of place or recently disturbed. James watched as she moved slowly along the row of blue dresses, her fingers gently probing the wall behind them. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the gentle rustle of fabric and the distant sounds of palace life continuing beyond these walls. "There's something here," Dr. Whitfield said suddenly, her voice tight with surprise. "The wall panel behind this dress feels different. It's not solid like the others." The team gathered around as she carefully examined the area. What appeared to be a seamless wall panel was actually a cleverly concealed door, so expertly crafted that it was virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "This is extraordinary craftsmanship," she murmured, running her fingers along what must have been the hidden mechanism. "This wasn't recently installed. This hiding place has been here for years, possibly decades." James felt his heart racing. The existence of the hidden compartment seemed to give credibility to the anonymous tip, but it also raised more questions than answers. Who had built this secret space, and when? Was Camilla even aware of its existence? Detective Inspector Chen took charge of the situation with professional calm. Before we proceed, I want everyone to understand the gravity of this moment. Whatever we find or don't find in there will have serious consequences. We document everything, handle nothing without gloves, and maintain absolute confidentiality. The mechanism was surprisingly simple once Dr. Whitfield located the hidden release. A gentle push in the right spot, and the panel swung inward silently, revealing a space roughly the size of a small closet. The air that emerged carried the faint scent of old fabric and something else, something that reminded James of the staterooms where the crown jewels were displayed. Inside the hidden space, their flashlights revealed what appeared to be carefully wrapped packages on custom-built shelves. Each item was wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and stored with the kind of care reserved for museum pieces. There were perhaps a dozen packages of various sizes, some small enough to hold jewelry, others large enough for ceremonial objects. My God, Dr. Whitfield breathed, her professional composure cracking for just a moment. If these are what I think they are. The first package they examined contained a small but exquisite diamond brooch that Dr. Whitfield immediately recognized from her extensive knowledge of royal jewelry. It was a piece that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, something that should have been in the official royal collection, not hidden in a secret compartment, but it was the largest package that truly shocked them all. As they carefully unwrapped the tissue paper, a magnificent fabric emerged. Silk so fine it seemed to shimmer in their flashlight beams, embroidered with gold thread and precious stones that caught the light like captured stars. James didn't need Dr. Whitfield's expertise to recognize what they had found. The late Queen's Coronation Robe, one of the most sacred and valuable artifacts in British royal history, was hidden in Camilla's private quarters. The discovery of the Coronation Robe sent shockwaves through the small team gathered in Camilla's dressing room. Dr. Whitfield's hands trembled as she examined the precious fabric, her decades of experience with royal artifacts making her reaction all the more significant. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "I personally inventoried this robe just 6 months ago. It was safely stored in the Royal Collection Vault at Windsor Castle. How can it be here?" Detective Inspector Chen immediately took control of the scene, treating it as a potential crime scene. She ordered that nothing else be touched until a full forensic team could be assembled. The implications were staggering. Either the Queen Consort had somehow stolen one of the most precious artifacts in British history, or something far more complex was happening. James found himself thinking about the timeline. The coronation robe had been worn by Queen Elizabeth during her coronation in 1953, and after her death, it had become one of the most carefully guarded pieces in the entire royal collection. For it to be here in this secret compartment meant that either palace security had been compromised or someone with the highest level of access had betrayed their trust. The chief of staff was immediately contacted, and within an hour, the palace was in crisis mode. Senior officials arrived discreetly, each one more shocked than the last as they learned about the discovery. The decision was made to postpone all of Camilla's public engagements for the day, citing a sudden illness. As word spread through the highest levels of the palace hierarchy, James noticed something troubling. While everyone seemed shocked by the discovery, there were whispers and glances that suggested some people weren't entirely surprised. It was as if there had been rumors or suspicions that were only now being voiced. Captain Morrison, called Lord Pemberton, one of the senior palace advisors who had just arrived. "I need to speak with you privately." They stepped into an adjacent room away from the controlled chaos of the investigation. Lord Pemberton's face was grave, his usual composure replaced by obvious concern. "James, this situation is more delicate than you might realize," he began, using the captain's first name in a way that immediately signaled the seriousness of their conversation. "There have been irregularities reported over the past few months. Small things mostly, items not being where they should be, security footage showing unexplained activity in restricted areas." James felt his blood run cold. "You suspected something was wrong and didn't tell us." "We suspected someone was accessing areas they shouldn't," Lord Pemberton corrected. "But we never imagined it could involve the Queen Consort. We thought perhaps it was a staff member with financial troubles, or possibly someone taking photographs for tabloid newspapers." The revelation that palace officials had been aware of security breaches but hadn't shared this information with the protection detail was deeply troubling. James realized that the investigation they thought was just beginning had actually been ongoing in secret for months. Meanwhile, back in the dressing room, Dr. Whitfield continued her examination of the hidden items. Each piece she uncovered seemed to increase the mystery rather than solve it. There were items that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, but also pieces that dated back much further, jewelry and ceremonial objects that should have been in various royal collections or on display in the Tower of London. "This doesn't make sense," she told Detective Inspector Chen. "Some of these pieces haven't been missing at all. According to my records, they're still officially in their proper locations. How can they be in two places at once?" The detective's experience with complex cases told her that they were dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple theft. The level of planning required, the construction of the hidden compartment, and the careful preservation of the items suggested a long-term operation involving multiple people. As the afternoon progressed, the investigation expanded. A discreet team of experts was brought in to examine the hidden compartment itself, looking for clues about when it was built and how long it had been in use. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. The compartment had been professionally constructed, with climate control systems and preservation equipment that rivaled those used in major museums. The work was not recent. Forensic analysis suggested it had been built at least 20 years ago, long before Camilla had moved into these quarters. "This changes everything," Detective Inspector Chen announced to the assembled team. "We're not looking at a recent theft. This hidden space was created decades ago, and it's been used to store royal artifacts for years, possibly by multiple people." The implications were staggering. If the compartment predated Camilla's residency in these rooms, then she might not be the original person responsible for the thefts. But that raised even more troubling questions about how many people within the palace might be involved in what appeared to be a sophisticated, long-term operation to steal royal artifacts. James found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about palace security. How many other hidden compartments might exist? How many other staff members might be involved? The very foundation of trust that the Royal Protection Unit depended on seemed to be crumbling around them. As evening approached, the decision was made to confront Camilla directly. She was quietly recalled from her charity engagement, told only that there was an urgent matter requiring her immediate attention. The plan was to bring her back to the palace without arousing media suspicion, and then present her with the evidence. James volunteered to be part of the team that would speak with her. Despite the evidence, he still found it difficult to believe that the woman he had protected and worked with for years could be involved in something like this. But his duty was clear. He needed to help uncover the truth no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The waiting was the hardest part. As they prepared for Camilla's return, James walked through the palace corridors he knew so well, seeing them now with different eyes. How many secrets were hidden behind these ancient walls? How many people working here might not be who they seemed? When Camilla's car finally pulled up to the private entrance, James could see through the window that she looked concerned but not guilty. Her expression was one of confusion and worry, not the fear he might have expected from someone who knew she was about to be confronted with evidence of wrongdoing. As she stepped out of the car, James made a decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of immediately escorting her to the formal meeting that had been arranged, he approached her directly. "Your Majesty, before we go inside, there's something you need to know," he said quietly. "We've found items hidden in your dressing room. Important items. We need you to help us understand how they got there." The look of complete shock and confusion on Camilla's face was so genuine that James immediately knew they had been wrong about something fundamental. Camilla's reaction to James's warning was immediate and visceral. The color drained from her face and she gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Hidden items? In my dressing room?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "James, what are you talking about? What kind of items?" The genuine confusion and fear in her voice convinced James that whatever was happening, Camilla was not the mastermind behind it. He had seen enough suspects over the years to recognize when someone was truly surprised versus when they were acting. "Ma'am, we found a hidden compartment behind your evening gowns. Inside were royal artifacts, including," he paused, still hardly believing it himself, "including the late Queen's coronation robe." Camilla's legs seemed to give way slightly and James quickly steadied her. The shock on her face was so complete that several palace staff members nearby noticed and began to approach with concern. "That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "I've never seen any hidden compartment." "The Coronation Robe? James, you must believe me. I would never take anything that belonged to Elizabeth, never." As they made their way inside, Camilla's mind raced with possibilities. She had been living in those quarters for several years, but she had never noticed anything unusual about the wall behind her dresses. The realization that someone had been using her private space to hide stolen artifacts was both terrifying and humiliating. The formal meeting took place in one of the palace's private conference rooms. Present were the Chief of Staff, Detective Inspector Chen, Dr. Whitfield, and several senior palace officials. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone struggling to balance their respect for Camilla with the serious nature of the allegations. "Your Majesty," began the Chief of Staff, "we need to ask you some difficult questions. When did you first become aware of the hidden compartment in your dressing room?" "I wasn't aware of it at all until Captain Morrison told me just now," Camilla replied firmly. "I had no idea it existed. I've never noticed anything unusual about that wall." Detective Inspector Chen leaned forward. "Ma'am, can you think of anyone who might have had access to your private quarters? Anyone who might have known about this hidden space?" Camilla considered the question carefully. "Well, the cleaning staff, of course. My personal dresser, Margaret. The security team does regular sweeps. But I can't imagine any of them being involved in something like this." Dr. Whitfield spoke up. "Your Majesty, some of the items we found have been missing from the royal collection for years. The thefts appear to have been happening long before you moved into those quarters." This revelation seemed to provide some relief to Camilla, but it also raised new concerns. If the thefts had been ongoing for years and the hidden compartment had been built decades ago, then they were dealing with a sophisticated, long-term operation that went far beyond any individual resident of those rooms. "I think we need to examine the history of those quarters," suggested James. "Who lived there before Her Majesty? Who had access to them during renovations or between residents?" The Chief of Staff made a note. "We'll pull the complete records. But this investigation is going to require us to examine everyone who has had access to those rooms over the past 20 years. As the meeting continued, Camilla found herself thinking about small things she had noticed but dismissed over the years. Occasionally, she would find her dresses arranged slightly differently than she remembered. Sometimes she would smell a faint, unfamiliar perfume in her dressing room. Once, she had even mentioned to her dresser that she thought someone might have been in her room while she was away, but they had attributed it to the cleaning staff. "There were signs," she admitted reluctantly. "Small things that I didn't think much about at the time. Sometimes my clothes seemed to have been moved slightly. I thought perhaps the cleaning staff was being more thorough than usual." Detective Inspector Chen made careful notes. "Can you remember specific dates when you noticed these disturbances?" "Not specific dates, but it seemed to happen most often when I was away on longer trips. Royal tours, extended visits to other residences. I was often gone for a week or more." This information was crucial. It suggested that whoever was using the hidden compartment was monitoring Camilla's schedule and accessing the space when they knew she would be away. This level of inside knowledge pointed to someone with access to her private calendar and travel plans. James realized that they needed to expand their investigation beyond the immediate palace staff. Anyone with security clearance who could access scheduling information was now a potential suspect. This included not just palace employees but also staff at other royal residences, security contractors, and even some government officials. "We need to look at this differently," he said to the group. "We're not just investigating a theft. We're investigating what appears to be a network of people who have been systematically stealing royal artifacts for decades." The scope of the investigation was becoming overwhelming. Dr. Whitfield estimated that the items they had found so far could be worth millions of pounds, but more importantly, they represented irreplaceable pieces of British history. The cultural and historical value was incalculable. As the day wore on, forensic teams arrived to process the hidden compartment and its contents. They found fingerprints, fabric fibers, and other evidence that would need to be analyzed. More disturbing, they found evidence that the compartment had been accessed recently, within the past few weeks. "Someone has been here very recently," reported the lead forensic technician. "There are fresh fingerprints on the mechanism, and some of the tissue paper wrapping shows recent handling." This news sent a chill through the assembled group. It meant that whoever was responsible was still active, still accessing the hidden space. They might not even know yet that their operation had been discovered. Camilla suggested something that hadn't occurred to the investigators. What if we set up surveillance? If someone is still using that space, they might come back. Detective Inspector Chen nodded. That's exactly what we're going to do. We'll install hidden cameras and motion sensors. If anyone tries to access that compartment, we'll know immediately. But James raised a practical concern. Ma'am, that means you'll need to continue living in those quarters as if nothing has happened. You'll essentially be bait in a trap. Are you comfortable with that? Without hesitation, Camilla agreed. If it will help catch whoever is responsible for this, then yes. I want these artifacts returned to where they belong, and I want to clear my name completely. The decision was made to keep the discovery completely secret while they set up their surveillance operation. Camilla would return to her normal schedule, and only a select few people would know about the ongoing investigation. As the meeting concluded, James found himself admiring Camilla's courage. She was willing to put herself at risk to help solve a mystery that could have destroyed her reputation. It was clear that whoever was behind the thefts had chosen her quarters specifically because they never expected her to be suspected. But as they prepared to leave the conference room, Dr. Whitfield made one more disturbing observation. There's something else we need to consider. If there's one hidden compartment we didn't know about, there might be others. This could be just the tip of the iceberg. The realization that there might be more hidden spaces throughout the palace, possibly containing more stolen artifacts, meant that their investigation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The surveillance operation began immediately. Within hours of the discovery, a team of technical specialists had installed state-of-the-art monitoring equipment throughout Camilla's private quarters. Hidden cameras were positioned to monitor the secret compartment, while motion sensors and audio recording devices were placed strategically to capture any unauthorized access. James coordinated the security arrangements, ensuring that the surveillance could be monitored 24 hours a day without arousing suspicion among the regular palace staff. A small team of trusted officers took shifts in a nearby room, watching the feeds and ready to respond at a moment's notice. Camilla proved to be remarkably composed under the circumstances. She continued her daily routine as if nothing had changed, attending meetings, hosting events, and maintaining her normal social calendar. Only those closest to her might have noticed a slight tension in her demeanor, but she handled the pressure with grace. 3 days into the surveillance operation, they got their first break. The motion sensors detected movement in Camilla's dressing room at 2:30 in the morning. James, who was on duty that night, immediately alerted the response team while keeping his eyes glued to the camera feeds. What he saw shocked him. A figure dressed in dark clothing was moving confidently through the dressing room, clearly familiar with the layout. The person moved directly to the hidden compartment, operating the concealed mechanism with practiced ease. This was definitely not someone who had stumbled upon the secret space by accident. "We have movement in the target area," James whispered into his radio. "Subject appears to be accessing the hidden compartment." Detective Inspector Chen, who was monitoring from another location, gave the order to wait. They wanted to see what the intruder would do, and hopefully identify them before making an arrest. The figure on the camera was careful and methodical, unwrapping several of the remaining artifacts and examining them with what appeared to be a small flashlight. They seemed to be checking the condition of the items, possibly preparing to remove them. It was then that James noticed something that made his blood run cold. The intruder was wearing what appeared to be palace security credentials. This wasn't a random thief who had somehow gained access to the building. This was someone who belonged here, someone with legitimate authority to be in these areas. "Detective Inspector," James called quietly, "the subject is wearing palace identification. This is an inside job." The realization that they were dealing with a palace employee made the situation infinitely more complex. This person would know security procedures, shift changes, and patrol routes. They would also know how to avoid detection and could potentially destroy evidence if they realized they were being watched. After about 10 minutes, the intruder carefully rewrapped the artifacts and closed the hidden compartment. Instead of leaving immediately, they spent several more minutes in the dressing room, apparently checking to ensure everything appeared normal. They're extremely careful, Detective Inspector Chen observed. This level of caution suggests they've been doing this for a long time without being caught. As the figure prepared to leave, they made a crucial mistake. They turned toward one of the hidden cameras, and for just a moment their face was clearly visible. James immediately recognized the person on the screen, and the identification sent shockwaves through his entire understanding of the case. "My God," he breathed into his radio. "It's Margaret Thornfield." Margaret Thornfield was Camilla's personal dresser, a woman who had worked for the royal family for over 30 years. She had been with the household long before Camilla's arrival, having previously served other members of the royal family. Her long service record and impeccable reputation had made her above suspicion. The team watched as Margaret left the dressing room and made her way through the palace corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She used her security card to access restricted areas and moved through the building without triggering any alarms. "We need to follow her," Detective Inspector Chen decided. "But carefully. We don't want to spook her before we understand the full scope of her operation." James coordinated with the palace security team to track Margaret's movements without alerting her to their surveillance. They watched as she made her way to the staff quarters and disappeared into her own room. "Should we arrest her now?" asked one of the security officers. "Not yet," Detective Inspector Chen replied. "We need to search her quarters and see what else we can find. This woman has had access to palace treasures for 30 years. There's no telling how much she might have taken or where she might have hidden it." The next morning, Margaret reported for duty as usual, showing no signs of nervousness or awareness that she had been discovered. She greeted Camilla warmly and began her normal routine of organizing clothes and preparing the queen consort's wardrobe for the day's events. Watching Margaret interact with Camilla while knowing what they had witnessed the night before was surreal for James. The woman seemed genuinely devoted to her employer, showing the same care and attention she had always displayed. It was hard to reconcile this behavior with the calculated theft they had witnessed. During Margaret's lunch break, a search warrant was executed on her personal quarters within the palace. What the investigators found there exceeded their worst fears. Margaret's room contained a sophisticated cataloging system, with detailed records of every item she had stolen over the years. The records revealed the true scope of her operation. Margaret had been systematically stealing royal artifacts for over 2 decades, carefully selecting items that were unlikely to be missed immediately. She had been selling some pieces to private collectors while keeping others hidden in various locations throughout the palace. Most shocking of all, the investigators discovered that Margaret had not been working alone. Her records included names, dates, and transactions involving several other palace employees, as well as outside contacts who helped her authenticate and sell the stolen artifacts. "This is a major criminal enterprise," Detective Inspector Chen announced as she reviewed Margaret's records. "We're looking at millions of pounds worth of stolen artifacts and a network of co-conspirators both inside and outside the palace." The evidence also revealed how Margaret had gained access to the secret compartment. She had discovered it years earlier during renovation work in those quarters, and had been using it as a storage space ever since. When Camilla moved into the rooms, Margaret simply continued using the hidden space, knowing that the queen consort was unlikely to discover it. James felt sick as he realized how perfectly Margaret had positioned herself to commit these crimes. As a personal dresser, she had intimate access to private quarters, detailed knowledge of travel schedules, and the complete trust of the royal family. Her long service record had made her virtually invisible to security concerns. The decision was made to arrest Margaret that afternoon, but first they wanted to gather more intelligence about her network of accomplices. Detective Inspector Chen coordinated with specialists in art crime and international trafficking to understand the full scope of the operation. "We need to be careful how we handle this," warned the Chief of Staff. "If word gets out that palace security has been compromised to this extent, it could seriously damage the reputation of the royal family." As they prepared for Margaret's arrest, James couldn't help but think about Camilla's courage in agreeing to continue living in her quarters while they conducted their surveillance. She had been sharing her private space with someone who had been systematically robbing the royal family for decades. Yet she had remained calm and focused on helping solve the case. The irony was bitter. Margaret had chosen to hide her stolen treasures in Camilla's quarters, specifically because she never expected the queen consort to be suspected of theft. She had been using Camilla's reputation and position as cover for her own criminal activities. When the time came to make the arrest, Margaret's reaction was as composed as everything else about her operation. She showed no surprise when Detective Inspector Chen identified herself and explained the charges. Instead, she simply nodded and asked if she could finish organizing Camilla's evening gown before being taken away. Even in custody, Margaret maintained her dignity and professionalism, as if her decades of loyal service somehow balanced out her crimes. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and her network was about to be exposed completely. Margaret's arrest sent shockwaves through the palace community, but it was only the beginning of what would become one of the largest art theft investigations in royal family history. Once in custody, Margaret proved to be surprisingly cooperative, perhaps realizing that her decades-long operation had finally come to an end. During her initial interview, she revealed the true scope of her criminal network. The operation involved at least 6 other palace employees, 3 art dealers in London, and international buyers in Europe and Asia. What had started as an opportunistic theft 30 years ago had evolved into a sophisticated criminal enterprise worth millions of pounds. "I never meant for it to become so large," Margaret told Detective Inspector Chen during their recorded interview. "It started when I found a small piece of jewelry that had been forgotten in storage. When I realized no one missed it, I thought perhaps other forgotten items could find new homes." But Margaret's justification rang hollow when investigators examined her detailed records. Far from taking only forgotten items, she had systematically targeted some of the most valuable pieces in the royal collection, including items with significant historical importance. The investigation expanded rapidly as police raided the homes and businesses of Margaret's accomplices. At a storage facility in East London, they discovered over 200 stolen royal artifacts, carefully preserved and ready for sale. The collection included jewelry, ceremonial objects, historical documents, and even furniture from various royal residences. James accompanied Dr. Whitfield to the storage facility, and both were stunned by what they found. The stolen items represented centuries of British royal history, from Tudor-era jewelry to modern ceremonial pieces. Some items had been reported missing years ago, while others had never been discovered to be gone. "This is heartbreaking," Dr. Whitfield said as she examined a 16th-century ceremonial sword that should have been in the Tower of London. "Some of these pieces are absolutely irreplaceable. They represent our national heritage." The international scope of Margaret's operation became clear when police coordinated with authorities in France, Switzerland, and the United States. Several high-profile private collectors had unknowingly purchased stolen royal artifacts, believing they were acquiring pieces from legitimate estate sales. One of the most shocking discoveries came when investigators traced a 17th-century diamond tiara that had been sold to a wealthy American collector 5 years earlier. The tiara had supposedly been in the royal collection at Windsor Castle, but when Dr. Whitfield checked, she found that the piece on display was actually a sophisticated replica. "They weren't just stealing artifacts," she explained to the investigation team. "They were replacing some pieces with expertly crafted fakes. The level of planning and resources required for this is extraordinary." The replica operation led investigators to a master craftsman in Belgium who had been creating fake royal artifacts for Margaret's network. His workshop contained detailed plans and photographs of dozens of royal pieces, some of which hadn't been stolen yet, but were clearly being prepared for future thefts. As the investigation continued, Camilla faced the difficult task of continuing her royal duties while her private life was under intense scrutiny. Although she had been completely cleared of any wrongdoing, the media had begun to pick up hints that something significant was happening at the palace. "Ma'am, we're going to need to prepare a public statement soon," the palace press secretary advised during a private meeting. "The story is too big to keep quiet much longer, and we want to control the narrative." Camilla agreed, understanding that transparency would be better than allowing speculation to grow. The decision was made to announce the discovery and arrests once all the major suspects had been taken into custody. James found himself reflecting on how the investigation had changed his view of palace security. For years they had focused on external threats, terrorists, stalkers, protesters. They had never adequately considered the possibility that the greatest threat might come from within, from people who had earned trust over decades of faithful service. "We're going to have to completely overhaul our security protocols," he told his team during a briefing. "Background checks, regular audits, access controls, everything needs to be examined." Meanwhile, Margaret's cooperation led to the recovery of artifacts that had been missing for decades. A ceremonial crown that had supposedly been destroyed during World War II was found in a Swiss bank vault. Documents signed by Queen Victoria were discovered in the private collection of a French businessman who had bought them in good faith from one of Margaret's dealers. The emotional impact on the royal family was significant. Many of the stolen pieces had deep personal meaning beyond their monetary value. Queen Elizabeth's coronation robe, found in Camilla's secret compartment, represented not just a priceless artifact, but a connection to the most important day of the late Queen's life. "I keep thinking about all the times I was in that room, getting dressed for events, completely unaware that Elizabeth's robe was hidden just feet away," Camilla confided to James during one of their security briefings. "It feels like such a violation of her memory." The investigation also revealed the personal cost of Margaret's crimes on the palace community. Several innocent staff members fell under suspicion as investigators worked to identify all members of the network. The atmosphere of trust that had always characterized relationships between royal family members and their staff was severely damaged. One of Margaret's accomplices was Robert Chen, a security guard who had been providing inside information about patrol schedules and security camera blind spots. His arrest was particularly painful for James, who had worked closely with Robert for over 5 years and had considered him a friend. "How do you rebuild trust after something like this?" James asked Detective Inspector Chen during one of their regular coordination meetings. "How do you know who you can rely on?" "You don't," she replied honestly. "But you put better systems in place. You create checks and balances. You make it harder for any individual to operate without oversight." As Margaret's trial approached, prosecutors worked to calculate the full value of what had been stolen. The monetary figure was staggering, over £50 million in artifacts, not counting the irreplaceable historical value. But the damage to the royal family's sense of security and privacy was incalculable. The most disturbing revelation came when investigators discovered that Margaret had been photographing private areas of the royal residences and selling those images to tabloid newspapers. For years, she had been documenting the private lives of the people she served, turning their trust in her into profit. "She didn't just steal objects," Dr. Whitfield observed. "She stole their privacy, their security, their peace of mind. That might be the greatest crime of all." As the investigation neared its conclusion, James realized that while they had solved the immediate mystery of the stolen artifacts, they had also uncovered something much larger and more troubling about the vulnerability of institutions that depend on personal trust and loyalty. The discovery in Camilla's closet had revealed not just a theft, but a betrayal that went to the heart of how the royal family lived and worked. The implications would be felt for years to come, changing forever how the palace approached security and staff relationships. 6 months after the discovery in Camilla's closet, the royal family faced the difficult task of rebuilding trust and security while dealing with the public aftermath of the largest theft in royal history. Margaret Thornfield's trial had concluded with a sentence of 15 years in prison. But the damage to the institution went far beyond what any court could address. James Morrison found himself at the center of implementing sweeping security reforms. The investigation had revealed security weaknesses that went back decades, and the palace was determined to ensure nothing like this could happen again. "We're essentially rebuilding our entire approach to internal security," James explained to the new team of specialists brought in from Scotland Yard. "Every process, every protocol, every assumption about trust needs to be examined." The new security measures were comprehensive but necessarily intrusive. All palace employees now underwent enhanced background checks every 3 years. Access to royal residences was tracked electronically, and no single person could access valuable collections without a colleague present. The days of implicit trust based on years of service were over. Camilla had become an unexpected hero in the story, praised for her courage in allowing her private quarters to be used as surveillance bait, and for her grace under pressure during the investigation. The media coverage, initially skeptical, had turned largely positive as the full story emerged. Her Majesty showed remarkable strength throughout this ordeal, Detective Inspector Chen told reporters during the final press conference. She could have insisted on her privacy being protected, but instead she chose to help us catch the criminals. The recovery of stolen artifacts continued for months as international investigations led to discoveries in private collections around the world. Dr. Whitfield worked tirelessly to authenticate recovered pieces and oversee their return to the royal collection. We've recovered approximately 80% of what was stolen. She reported to palace officials. Some pieces may never be found, having been sold to buyers who have chosen to remain anonymous. But the most historically significant items, including the Coronation Robe, are safely back where they belong. The Coronation Robe itself had been carefully examined by textile experts and found to be in remarkably good condition, despite its time in the hidden compartment. The climate control systems Margaret's network had installed, ironically, had preserved the priceless artifact better than some official storage facilities. Margaret's motivations remained partially mysterious even after her conviction. During her trial, she claimed to have been motivated by a desire to share royal treasures with people who would appreciate them, rather than keeping them locked away from public view. But investigators suspected financial gain had been her primary motivation, given the sophisticated sales network she had established. She developed an elaborate justification for her crimes, the prosecuting attorney explained. But at its core, this was about money and the thrill of getting away with something audacious. The impact on other palace staff was severe. Several long-serving employees requested transfers or early retirement, unable to cope with the new atmosphere of suspicion and enhanced security measures. The close-knit community that had characterized palace life for generations was forever changed. James struggled with these changes himself. He had always prided himself on knowing and trusting the people he worked with. But now every interaction was colored by the knowledge that betrayal could come from anywhere. "We can't live in fear," Camilla reminded him during one of their security briefings. "Yes, we need better systems, but we also need to remember that most people are honest and loyal. We can't let Margaret's crimes destroy our faith in everyone else." The hidden compartment in Camilla's dressing room was permanently sealed and converted into a display case for recovered artifacts. The irony was not lost on anyone that the space once used to hide stolen treasures now showcased the successful recovery efforts. Additional searches throughout the palace had revealed 2 other hidden compartments, both empty but showing signs of recent use. The full extent of the palace's secret spaces might never be known, as many had been created during construction and renovations over the centuries. International cooperation had led to arrests in 5 countries and the recovery of royal artifacts worth over £40 million. Several prestigious auction houses had implemented new authentication procedures after unknowingly selling stolen royal pieces, and the art world had been forced to confront the ease with which stolen artifacts could enter legitimate markets. "This case has changed how we think about art theft globally," explained Interpol's art crime specialist. "The level of sophistication and the international scope showed us vulnerabilities we didn't know existed." For Camilla personally, the ordeal had been transformative. She had faced potential disgrace and public humiliation, but her response to the crisis had actually strengthened her position within the royal family and improved her public image. "I learned that you can't control what people do to you, but you can control how you respond," she reflected during a private interview months later. "I chose to help find the truth rather than just protect myself, and I'm glad I made that choice." The anonymous tip that had started the entire investigation was eventually traced to Robert Chen, Margaret's accomplice in the security department. Facing his own criminal charges, he had decided to expose the operation in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. His betrayal of Margaret had been motivated by fear that the network was becoming too ambitious and would eventually be caught. "Honor among thieves only goes so far," Detective Inspector Chen observed. "When people realize they're going down, they often try to take others with them or save themselves by cooperating." James had been promoted to Chief of Royal Protection following the investigation, recognition of his professional handling of an unprecedented crisis, but he sometimes wondered if the palace would ever feel truly secure again. "We've learned that security isn't just about keeping bad people out," he told his new team during their first meeting. "It's also about making sure the people we trust deserve that trust, and having systems in place to detect problems before they become crises." The investigation had cost the royal family millions of pounds in enhanced security measures, legal fees, and authentication experts. But the alternative, allowing the theft network to continue operating, would have been far more costly in terms of lost heritage and damaged reputation. A year after the discovery, Queen Elizabeth's coronation robe was displayed publicly for the first time since her death. In a special exhibition about the investigation and recovery efforts, the exhibit drew record crowds, with many visitors expressing amazement at the story of how palace security had been compromised and ultimately restored. As James walked through the exhibition, seeing artifacts that had been missing for decades now safely displayed behind new security systems, he reflected on how much had changed. The royal family had faced one of its greatest security challenges and emerged stronger, if more cautious. The story of Margaret Thornfield's betrayal would become part of palace legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust and the importance of balancing tradition with modern security needs. But it would also be remembered as a story of how courage and professionalism had triumphed over deception and greed. The hidden compartment that had started it all remained sealed, but its discovery had opened up conversations about transparency, security, and trust that would influence royal protocols for generations to come. In the end, the search of Camilla's closet had revealed far more than anyone expected, changing not just security procedures, but the very culture of the royal household.